Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast. My name is Philip Heitzen, a 20-year procurement practitioner, former head of procurement and advisor to procurement leaders around the world. I started out of procurement to help leaders and their teams access the resources they need to increase their impact through insight-driven procurement. You are listening to our flagship podcast where we pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics and tools that leading procurement teams are using to align their impact with the needs of their business. And today I wanted to share with you a bonus podcast, which is a recording from our recent AOP Live webinar with Amazon and iValuer. I was joined by Jean-Baptiste, the head of enterprise sales and professional services teams for Amazon Business France, and Vishal Patel, VP of product marketing at iValuer. And we discussed the complexity of tail spend management. You know, the number of low-cost transactions is just the beginning of the challenge for tail spend with procurement. The spend often finds its way into the tail through multiple wrong turns, each of which require a different approach by procurement and a correspondingly different resolution. There is no one cause of tail spend, and therefore there's no one solution. And so in today's episode, I asked Jean-Baptiste and Vishal to share how they define tail spend, how you can integrate self-service tail spend models into your overall management of this segment of your spend, and ways to look at the ROI of your tail spend program. Okay, well, let's go straight into this AOP Live discussion where I asked Jean-Baptiste if he could start by explaining if he found procurement or if procurement found him.
It's a good question. So I think at the very beginning, procurement chose me because I started as let's say in a consulting firm, and one of my mission was to work in the account payable team, and then let's say working further with the procurement team, and so I would say at the very beginning, so the customer chose me, and so the procurement chose me. But then I decided to stay, and this is why I joined the great team of the sourcing method of Société Générale. And there I spent a great 6 years of my life. So I would say that finally I choose procurement, and then thanks to Amazon Business, I'm also staying very close to the procurement. So I'm happy to be there.
And Vishal, I'm going to pose the same question to you.
Yeah, I was thinking about this one, and one of the things that I recalled was in business school where I had a course that I was super interested in, mainly because of how it was described. And the description was, there was one question in there that was extremely intriguing to me. It was something around, what does the sweater you're wearing have to do with the amount of sunlight in New Zealand? Right. Something like that, right? And it was related to the wool and the sheep and the grass. And, so that question was a course in extended enterprise management. And so that was like the beginning of that whole journey. And that was in business school. And then I went, I was an analyst as one of my first jobs out of business school at Aberdeen Group, if people remember them, that did benchmarking and stuff all in all of the procurement areas. So yeah, I think maybe that was me choosing procurement, I guess.
Yeah, I guess you were intrigued by something enough to want to know more about it versus finding yourself being placed in procurement and then growing to love it.
Yeah, but clarification, I've never worked in procurement, so there's
right. And I like that you're sporting the Love Procurement shirt as well, so I have to give a shout out for that. Always very popular, and we always have folks who are asking where to get their hands on those, so it's a popular accessory.
Extremely exclusive, yes.
So I'm going to go into the first topic that we want to talk about today, and I'm going to ask that Vishal to yourself, and of course Jean-Baptiste, this is a conversation, so please do jump in as well if you have anything to add, and likewise Vishal when I'm asking some questions of Jean-Baptiste. But the first question comes from Connie, and that question is, how do you actually define tail spend?
Yeah, I think so. Having said I've never worked in procurement, that I still have spent like 15 years in serving procurement customers, so I do know a little bit about procurement organizations. So I think tail spend to me refers to, if you look at a chart, like this is the spend and this is the suppliers, right? So it's usually a curve, and at the end there's a long tail, with low volume, low value transactions, higher volume, but also more suppliers, right? So it's mainly referring, I think, to a high volume transactions that are typically unmanaged by procurement, right? That they happen, they're needed, they happen out of the system, out of the policy, but and procurement, it's just unmanaged by procurement.
Mm-hmm. And I do have to follow up. I'm going to come to you in a moment, Jean-Baptiste, with the next question. But when we were actually talking in preparation, you kind of posed the question, and we thought, well, is this something that Jean-Baptiste would even want us to ask? Which was, how do you stop tail spend from even happening? So I'm going to put you on the spot, Vishal, and ask you, are there ways that you can actually think about stopping tail spend before it becomes something to actually manage?
So I think that in order to do anything, I think first you have to kind of understand what is your tail spend through a spend analysis exercise, right? Like this is something fairly typical for procurement organizations. You cleanse and enrich and categorize your spend. It comes from multiple sources, right? P cards, ERPs, invoices, T&E systems, and at the end you have a spend cube, and it's really an analysis at a line item level of your global spend or your company's spend, and it tells you what was purchased, which supplier was purchased from, who purchased it, what location, how much you paid for it, all that stuff. And once you know that, you're I think able to make decisions to in some cases even eliminate that from happening in the first place, right? So one of the ways we've seen our customers do that is when they understand, like, hey, I have these 1,000 suppliers that are one time or a few time usage in a year, or maybe more. But they've found that maybe half of those or 20% of those, there's enough spend amongst that group where it would be useful to have a contract with that supplier. So in one of our customers actually, and they are a electronics distributor, and what they did with iValue is set up this process which we've referred to as mass negotiations. So they will negotiate a contract with 200 suppliers at the same time, and because they want to put in some standardized language, they have a good idea of who those suppliers are, but they're doing it all at once. So that's a really taking out, that's, in my view, that's stopping that tail spend from happening, because now you have a contract, and hopefully you have a way for people to buy through that contract. But even in that case, you could still have tail spend.
That's interesting. So they're basically creating the ground rules for that category, and if you want to provide services or whether it's product, you have to abide by those kind of rules as a condition of entry, if you will. Yeah. So it brings that spend, it becomes spend under management essentially.
Yeah, and that's just one example, I think, how you could prevent it. Another way is, we've talked about like people call it different things, spot bids or tactical sourcing, 3 bids and a buy. I mean, that's another way, right? Like you find the things that would fit into that category and set up a process or a way for end users to do that, either by submitting a request to procurement or some easy way, but that's a quick turnaround, sort of fast sourcing event that also can eliminate basically a tail spend, right? So it depends what categories we're looking at, I think.
So I got a question, Jean-Baptiste. It's come from Magdalena, and it's talking a little bit about categorizing and organizing tail spend. How Vishal talked a little bit about how we need to at least, first of all, identify what the spend actually is before we can start to address it. Do you have any tips on how to actually go about identifying what is tail spend versus what is perhaps non-tail or managed spend, and does that require, when you think about doing that on an ongoing basis, changes to business processes?
It's a great question because I think it's a difficult one. I would say it depends first on your sourcing and procurement strategy. Maybe your focus will be on, I would say, reducing the number of suppliers. And so maybe you can start by focusing on how many suppliers are used, I don't know, once per year or once per month. You can have also a view on how many POs, for example, are generated for a value of less of, I don't know, $500, 500 euro, whatever, your local threshold. And so maybe it's the way to start and say what is below that. Maybe we can call that a tail spend, because as Vishal said, it's not managed. We can assume that there's no specific relationship. Maybe another view is to say that, okay, let's have a view on all the vendors and suppliers' name, and let's match our contract database. I'm pretty sure with useful tools like Evalua, I would say you can easily do that and say, okay, if there's no contract from the sourcing point of view, maybe we should also call it unmanaged. And so it can goes into the tail spend based on the, let's say, the amount of spent. What I would say is that also we should take into consideration that there's a lot of tail spend that is hidden, and because of, let's say, two things. I think there's multiple systems in the same organization. As of today, at least I've seen less, I would say, large worldwide corporate organizations saying, okay, I have one way to buy, which is apply everywhere in a seamless way, and I'm covering all the countries, even the very small subsidiaries. So I think we should also take into consideration in any study of the tail spend to say that we don't know that there's the, I would say, hidden part of the iceberg somewhere, which is or can be significant based on the maturity also of the procurement processes. And so we should acknowledge that maybe we should add, I would say, a ratio on to say, okay, I know that I have, I don't know, 5 million euro that I consider as tail spend, or I don't know, 10K suppliers that I consider as tail spend. But let's say, let's add 30, 50% more because we know that there's something hidden. And I think it's a way to consider the real tail spend. I think, like Vishal said, there's T&E systems. There's multiple ways in a company, to spend some money. And so I would say, let's try to categorize with the data that we know. And let's assume also that there's some, let's say, ways to find additional source of spend. And maybe a way to do that is to do some interviews with employees, I would say, the one that are buying, right? And so let's go to any business unit or service unit, whatever, and say, okay, guys, if you need to spend something, please, let's forget that I'm part of the sourcing team of the procurement team. And so tell me the truth and tell me how do you do. And I'm pretty sure that we will discover a lot of things and a lot of, I would say, tail spend, because it won't be managed by the sourcing team at all.
Vishal, when you're dealing with trying to help an organization get the hand on the tail spend for the first time, you're going from so many different disparate systems and you're bringing all this into, a spend cube and looking at spend analysis where you start to uncover a lot of the different areas of spend. How do you help companies then kind of get over the overwhelm of, well, there's 10,000 suppliers here, or there's 20,000 suppliers here. There's so much there, I can never do anything about it. I mean, is that something that you hear, or is that a hurdle that you see organizations have to get over and find a way to get over once they start to get more insight into the data around their tail?
Yeah, I think it's part of the process. It depends on how good your data is also. So most procurement organizations, I feel like at this point, have gone through some rationalization activities, right? So, I mean, there's still some out there that have, 10, 20, 30, 40,000 suppliers, but, 70% of those are used less than 5 times or something like that. There's still those organizations, but I think for the most part, and the Hackett group actually uses an interesting metric, is the number of suppliers per $1 billion of spend. And they talk about I think it's about 5,000 or 6,000 suppliers per $1 billion, and really advanced companies have lower than that, like 3,000 or 4,000, 2,000 or 3,000, and those that still have some work to do are higher, above 5,000 or 6,000. So that's an interesting metric. But I think ultimately you want to have a handle on that data, and then really look for patterns, right? So is there some low level of spend that you have initially categorized as tail, but find that it's recurring, either in the same department or in multiple departments? Or is it in the same category like MRO or something like that? Is it in specific locations? Is it global? So to find those patterns, and then based on the pattern to develop the strategy, right? So you might use those patterns to, there might be some categories that will add to your sourcing pipeline. Say, like, this is where we've aggregated it. It's more than $500,000 to spend. We need to really look at it and spend a few months doing a sourcing event, right? Which can be months. Others is, this is something that we just need to put, you need to direct the user to the right buying channel to get that, right? And it could be a marketplace like Amazon Business. It could be that you need to remind them that, hey, there's this process to get a tactical sourcing event done or a spot bid done, where you get 3 quotes from suppliers and select one, and you have your thing, and it's a few days versus a few months.
Right.
So I think it's just, there is work to do in terms of analyzing the data. There's no way around it. I feel.
And I actually want to talk about different channels in a minute. I'm going to come, Kelly, to you in just one moment as well to see if we've got any questions so far from the audience. But a question, Jean-Baptiste, for you is, how should we consider one-time purchases as tail spend? Are those to be managed as well versus, 500 euros 10 times, you're buying something once a month, for example, versus somebody has a requirement. It costs them 10,000 euros, for example, or $10,000 for a piece of consulting. Should that really constitute tail spend that's to be managed?
Again, a difficult conversation. I would say, so it depends first, I think, if it's a part of your core activity. I mean, if it's a one-time purchase, but it adds an incredible value of your product or your services that you are delivering to the customer, I would suggest that, no, you should consider it as, I would say, not strategic spend, but something that you should manage really well in partnership with the business units that you are working with as procurement or sourcing teams, because it will finally impact the customer experience, the product that we are delivering, or the services that the company is delivering to customers. So I would say, no matter of this, we should think about the, let's say, the usage and the value added of this service or product. And so I would say yes. On the other way, I would say if it's 10K one time, not at all linked to the core services or product that you are delivering to your customers, then it's a waste of time, if I may say, of a professional buyer just to work on 3 bids, a contract, and all, I would say, all the S2P process for something that you are going to use and throw, right? You are not going to repeat that again and again. So I would say you should not consider it as going into the I would say the sourcing on the procurement process at all, right? It should be done somewhere else. And I think we are going to tackle that with the sourcing channels. I guess I would say that we should guide. And when I say we, I mean the sourcing teams should guide and say, dear employee, you want to do this. Okay, the best way to get it done, it goes this path, because you will be, I don't know, able to do that on your own and quickly buy and deliver something within 2 days by your own. And we don't care, or not we don't care, but let's use the tools that we are going to provide you. While on I would say the opposite, the complete opposite is, hey, this is really important for the whole company. Let's have a chat. It doesn't mean that we are going to do that in months. Just we need to provide you some insights from the sourcing or whatever, because we want to develop, I don't know, this cool startup that we are working with, and maybe the services that you are looking for could be provided by this one. Or we can promote, I don't know, some local vendors, because we want to work with, I don't know, French vendors and whatever. And so if you have, let's say, some money to spend it there, because it will be better for the company.
Yeah, I think it's a really great point of consideration of what you're actually buying, because so often we put these spend thresholds in place and we don't necessarily consider the impact. So for example, we may put spend thresholds in place where we're doing something really strategic because a dollar number or a euro number is really high, but it's just something that's a cost of doing business. It's recurring. It's been recurring for years. And you have a small purchase that's actually directly connected to the future strategy of the business. And if you look at that based on the dollar amount or the euro amount the first time you pay, it may seem insignificant, but it's actually really critical to the business. Now, I'm going to come, Kelly, to you and just ask if we've got any questions so far from our audience today.
We have actually, and this is interesting. So first of all, if anybody is new to AOP Live, welcome, but no one is off the hook in an AOP Live session. So Phil, as you asked Vishal and Jean-Baptiste for their perspective on what is tail spend, I threw the same question out to the audience. And we actually got a number of different answers, everything from high volume but low value spend, small dollar value transactions, and applying the 80-20 rule by supplier. And to this point, we're discussing that tail spend often falls between the cracks of processes and systems. We actually have an excellent question from Joseph. He says he's interested on your thoughts on tail spend within a category for a specialty material where the purchases may be small, but the materials are critical to the end product. So what he's basically pointing out is that if we think of all small transactions as tail spend, we are going to miss a value creation opportunity. So Vishal, perhaps starting with you, and then Jean-Baptiste, I'll come to you for your comments on that same question. How do we make sure that just because purchases are small, they don't end up getting lumped in with tail spend when there really is some sort of criticality to what's being purchased?
Yeah, I think that part of that process, Jean-Baptiste mentioned, talking with doing interviews of those purchasers, right? I think that is also a key part of it. Like, you want to understand why that person had to buy that thing. And it may be that you find out that that's a very critical item, but you also maybe find out that the person couldn't follow the prescribed policy because of some reason, right? Like, they couldn't find who the supplier was, something wasn't working, it was not in the catalog, like, they just couldn't do it the way procurement thought it was supposed to happen. So there's like a fix needed. But yeah, I think it's important to understand like what is the reason for the buy, and you can't do that every time, but I think based on the data you might be able to find that yes, something it's an intriguing item. It's not it's kind of seems related to a core product or related to a core process that we have in our business, and we should inquire a little bit more about that versus something that's more like a clear sort of overhead spend or indirect spend that's not related to something that's going directly to a customer. So yeah, I think that just investigating, I think, is kind of part of this process.
Jean-Baptiste, anything you would add to that?
In Amazon, we like to work backwards, like we are saying, from the customer needs, and I would say let's do that also with the sourcing team and the business partner within the company. So I would say that let's go and talk to the board of the company, the head of the business unit, and so on and so on, and let's ask them this simple question: how I can help you, and what are your, let's say, key priorities for next year, and how I can influence that. And I would say, I guess it will bring different point of view that will be, I would say, amazing, because maybe someone will say, hey guys, because I don't know, we have seen that for the pandemic, and this material or these services will be key for me to, I would say, provide value or services for the next 3-6 months or a year. And so please help me, because it will be my key priorities, and it's helped me to achieve my targets, and I'm reporting that to the CEO of the company. And so I would say let's work backwards, start with what let's say the employees needs and what are the key top priorities for the companies, and let's decide, okay, let's move and build I would say the sourcing priorities based on that. For example, when I was working in a bank, we said, okay, guys, what do you need from us? And two things that weren't, I would say, that expected was to say, okay, we need to source quickly really good developers for us to implement very quickly and maybe speed up our ability to go to market with new services, new features, new product. And I would say from our sourcing point of view, it's like, okay, you want to spend some money with consulting people and so on. And they say, no. We want to be able to source via new ways like freelancers and so on, which is not very common in France, to be honest. And so this is why we were able to influence the roadmap of the sourcing, say, okay, we listen to you guys and you need new levers, new way to find, I would say, good developers and the best, I would say, sourcing service is go to freelancers. And you know that it's complicated to work with freelancers from a contract perspective, from a risk perspective, liability, and so on and so on. But we find, let's say, new vendors and new services to offer this internally, and I think it wasn't expected. If I were alone or let's say working with only buyers, I would have said, okay, let's do a contract with the top 5 of the biggest company providing developers in the world, so Accenture, blah blah blah, and I would have think, okay, I have a great, well, 5 contracts, great, I can cover 100% of the spend because those guys can provide anything to me, but still I would have missed what the customer or my customer as a sourcing manager really wanted. So in a nutshell, go and talk and say, what can I do for you? How I can be a real business partner, and build your own map based on that. And I'm pretty sure you will avoid, I would say, some tailspin discussion because they will say, okay, this is my priorities. Please help me get it done.
Absolutely.
I have one suggestion. When you go and talk to people, you should wear this T-shirt.
Yes.
And maybe bring Vishal. So Jean-Baptiste, actually to that point, you're starting to talk a little bit about customer experience, which is so critical for procurement. One of the questions that has come in from Nelly, I'm actually thrilled to get to ask an Amazon person this question. Nelly is looking at the difference between how procurement might handle direct tail spend from what we should consider success in indirect tail spend. And I think the comment is, when it's indirect, it really should be around certainly resource efficiency, but also convenience and how easy it is for the stakeholder. In other words, providing an Amazon-like experience, which I think everybody kind of holds as the gold standard in terms of B2C e-commerce. As we transition into looking at the customer experience, anything that you would add just to give us a little bit more, we all say Amazon-like experience. How should procurement be thinking about trying to deliver that Amazon-like experience when it comes to managing indirect tail spend?
I would say first open an Amazon business account and then you will have the real, I would say, Amazon experience. No kidding. It's very difficult, but I guess we should consider that I would suggest to have kind of personas also within your company to say that there's the frequent, I would say, buyer, not from a professional buyer, but someone that is saying, okay, I need to spend money, and every week placing a PO for our services, for our product, whatever, or multiple of things. And so those guys, let's say, they know by heart the P2P rules, they know even the name of the buyer in charge or whatever. So they are very well connected, I would say, with both the organization and the processes of P2P, I would say. While at the extreme opposite, you have also infrequent buyer, like the one for myself, I need to buy a new mouse or whatever, small services for translation, let's say. But I never did that and I won't redo that again and again. So it's one time purchase and I need some support. And to be honest, I'm very lost because even if the e-sourcing or the P2P tool is great with a cool UX and so on, like I guess Vishal, you talked about this earlier. It's like, yeah, but there's multiple contracts, there's multiple maybe punch outs and maybe unknown rules on oh, I can create my purchase requests, who I should add into the workflows, and so on and so on. So I would say same, start first, put yourself in the shoes of this infrequent buyer, this power buyer, or whatever, and say, okay, I log in for the first time, and oh, within few clicks, I can purchase or start my discussion. And so I would say I did that a lot with my, let's say, previous job, to think about what is the customer journey, how many steps, and to be honest, we started with meals, for example, and it's like, okay, I need to order a few meals for tomorrow meeting, and so pretty simple, right? We calculated that it required 90 steps to complete that. Very, very simple, and you say, okay, I can go to the supermarket and then I use my P card and then that's all right. But if you want to use that within, let's say, the P2P processes, it took 90 steps. It was, to be honest, a nightmare. And so we said, okay, how can we reduce that with, let's say, thinking of the one-click purchase that Amazon invented, right? Or we can reduce that to few clicks and to say, okay, I want to be able to complete my purchase within 5 minutes. And I think you should set goals like this, and then you will rethink and build new processes from end to end that meet those targets. And you should push yourself to say, okay, how can I complete that? And I think what people like, going back to Amazon, I would say, what people like is that on average, you can complete an order on Amazon within 7 to 8 minutes end to end, while we compare on average, even using internal catalogs and so on, it took at least 45 minutes. So this is the internal research that we did. And also this is the way that we can feel that what people like from the Amazon experience is just few clicks, few minutes, and then get it done. And cherry on the cake, I would say, getting delivered the same day or the day after. So I would say start, map your customer journey, and let's set some targets, minutes, number of steps, I don't know, easiness, or put some, I would say, non-frequent buyers and say, hey guys, you have 5 minutes to find a way to purchase this, and let's record their clicks, let's record their reaction, and I'm pretty sure you will learn a lot of things, and then build new processes.
Excellent. Thank you, Jean-Baptiste.
Yeah, that's a great question, Nelly, as well. And I love that answer. And the answer goes well beyond just technology from a procurement perspective. It's the entire buying experience. It's something that, both of you will, I'm sure, do within your organizations. When you're looking at it from a business development or a sales or a marketing perspective, which I look at procurement as we are those people as well. We're just doing that internally. When you're starting to look at personas based on usage, and when you're looking at the buyer journey, and I just don't feel like we do that enough on the procurement side when we're looking at working with our stakeholders. So I think that's fantastic advice for anybody listening. Thank you, Jean-Baptiste. I want to ask, there's so many questions, so that's a great thing. We're getting a lot of questions that are coming into the chat as well. I want to talk a little bit about buying channels, Vishal. And, if you've got any advice on how to kind of think about where you go, specifically from a tail spend perspective, if you're going to have buyers negotiating versus, as Jean-Baptiste mentioned earlier, kind of the self-guided technology routes, and if there's only certain areas of spend that should be one versus the other, or if all purchases, for example, are good candidates for the more self-guided technology-driven buying.
I think it's a mixture of those things. So the way we work with customers, of course, we have an e-procurement tool, right, which actually has an integrated search with Amazon Business, is connected to other suppliers. So we're not changing the experience. Actually, all the search, and actually our sort of philosophy is search and content first philosophy, right? So you search for it, you find the content, and you check out, really. And we're actually doing that quite often, managing or sort of monitoring how many clicks it is to check out, that sort of thing. there's, I think there's a lot of all the catalog items, all the items that we're able to aggregate from Amazon Business, from Grainger, from other suppliers that are connected. And we're able to offer the user like a single search and search across all those and find what they need, right? So they can see Amazon Business, they can see Grainger, they can see their posted catalog items, they find what they need, and they check out. So in that sense, and also I feel like often people think of e-procurement technology as being like the outdated technology, but it's come a long way. If you haven't seen like a recent e-procurement tool, like things have come really far, and it's very much like, obviously I don't think e-procurement is always trailing e-commerce, right? But it's the gap's getting closer every year, I would say. So a lot has changed there. So then if you take the other side of things, so where you might need some help, right, like procurement assistance kind of thing, for me that's another buying channel where and you have to think about the buyer journey again, as Jean-Baptiste said. Like if someone searches for something, they can't find it, it should be clear that, hey, you can go and put in a request to your procurement organization, do it this way. But often what I hear is when people put in the request to procurement, it's like a black hole. It's gone in and nothing ever comes out. It's you don't know if it's accepted, you don't know the status, you don't know what's happened to your request. And so this is where technology comes in. Like it should be easy to track that, right? Like I've sent in a request, it's now accepted. I know it's going to take 5 days, and in 7 days I'll get my thing. It should be like that kind of service that procurement, I think, is offering to their internal customers. So those are some things. And the third one I would say, just to add, is there will be some items where procurement says, hey, we have a supplier and we have a contract for this, why aren't you using it? But then it's figuring out why that buyer didn't use that. Maybe something's not working, maybe the service is not there, maybe the quality is not there, maybe it's taking too long to get it delivered. But that's part of that investigation thing, I think.
So the going in point really should be to have kind of this self-guided hub, if you will, where everybody knows to go and start there. You go and start there, and then you can search, you can find what you're looking for, and if you can't, then it's going to give the buyer, it's going to take the buyer on their journey then to engage with procurement, and then have like a triage, and it's tracked, and so there's actually transparency to where that request is in the buying process. But always start with the procurement tool, because then you're driving everybody to a single, kind of into a single channel.
I'll give you another example. So the other reason to start there is, like, in our tool, we're able to give procurement analytics on failed searches, for example. Like users search for something, but they didn't find anything. So they're looking at the back end, the category managers, the buyers, they're looking and they're saying, okay, this month, 50 failed searches on this one item. They're going to look at that item and figure out a way to, make it available, right? Because it's an item in demand. But the other also thing is, people are, with Amazon Business, there's always this concern, like, hey, they're going to buy everything. But with Amazon Business, like the way you can actually control or block categories makes it so that everything is open, and procurement can then say in the back end, hey, we don't want people to buy this item from Amazon, so we're going to block it. But everything else is item, and it shows up, within the screen with everything else. So it's an easier experience.
I have a question for Jean-Baptiste that came in from Brandy. And Brandy was asking, in what categories have you seen the most success in consolidating tail spend, specifically with Amazon Business?
I would say IT peripherals, MRO, and Janssen. And for, let's say, some of our customers also, a lot of office supply. Even if for the last one, I guess it's a good one, because we can see that it's not that critical, but sometimes it's high volume and high spend that could be considered, as managed spend. But also we need to think, and maybe it goes further into the discussion of what is the ROI of the function, right? Is to say that we should also consider and try to size what is the required effort to get it done as sourcing team. So how many EFTs you put in, let's say, negotiating that, and going back to my discussion of how much is influencing the value that we as a company, we provide to the customers. And then maybe you can decide, okay, this even if it's managed, let's consider that non-strategic, and I'm okay not to manage it anymore, because I will, let's say, thanks to e-procurement tools, thanks to Amazon Business or others, I guess we can cite all the others people that are providing punch catalogs and so on. It's like, okay, let's put them, and if we see that it's working well and the people are happy, I would say the employees are happy with the service that we provide, then it's done. It's a success from a sourcing team point of view. And while if people are start complaining because I don't know of poor quality, poor delivery experience, or poor relationship with a service provider, for example, then reconsider to, I would say, manage it again from a sourcing point of view.
So I want to come back to ROI in a minute, but I do want to come back to Kelly, because I know we've got a number of other questions. It's probably hard to ask you, Kelly, to pick one or two out of what's come in, but anything that you'd like to pose to Jean-Baptiste and Vishal?
There is, and this is incredibly hard. There are so many excellent questions coming in. So I think the question that I would like to pose, I think this will help us sort of transition to what will be our final topic today. I think Darren is asking the $1 million question. So before procurement puts programs in place to manage tail spend, before we define how we know if we're successful or not, do we need to set our own expectations? And here is the question. Can you ever get rid of tail spend completely? So Vishal, let me start with you. Is it a realistic expectation for procurement to think, or for the company to expect, that we're ever completely going to get rid of tail spend?
No, I don't think so. It's not realistic, just because people will always find a way, whether on purpose or whether it's easier. There's always something that is easier to someone, right, to do. But also, you won't get rid of all tail spend, because there's going to be a portion where it's not worth focusing the time on. And I think that you'll get your ROI focusing on those items that are clear, and those will become clear based on the data, and putting in those buying channels, and putting some in contracts and finding new suppliers. But there will definitely be some chunk that you won't be able to address. It's not worth the time to address. But even if you do address it, the following year you'll have more of it that will keep adding on. So that tail, the tail of the tail will maybe always be there, I guess. And I think people should be okay with that. Is my view.
And Kelly, I want to jump in because I can't resist a follow-up question, and I'll ask this to Jean-Baptiste then, was there ever, can we ever get rid of managing tail spend from a procurement perspective in the traditional way, where we think about having to manage it from all these resources and people? Will there be a day when technology is completely guiding our organizations in the purchases that we consider being tail spend?
I think we are not that far from this, and I see some, I would say, pioneers customers that are willing to explore with us and with companies like Evalua, thanks to, I would say, innovative technologies. Vishal surfaced it earlier with, like, I'm staying within Evalua and I'm searching for any item or services, and then with that cool Evalua UX, I have, let's say, all the knowledge and all the available ways to purchase something, some with few clicks, and I already know the price, the delivery time, and is it under contract, off contract, and maybe how difficult it will be to, let's say, to go through the procurement journey. So I would say, as of today, we still need to convince a lot of procurement leaders that maybe it's okay to stop spending time on sourcing activities and procurement activities for tail spend, but to reallocate all those energy, because to be very honest, tail spend is taking so much energy to a company that reinvesting even part of this energy and part of this effort and those resources into, let's say, building long-term relationship with some I would say innovative companies that will be able to say, okay, we will do that on your behalf, right? I think back in that time, this is not something new, right? All the BPOs companies were doing that for 20 years now. And I think thanks to the new technology, thanks to also marketplaces and the innovative technologies that e-procurement companies are building with also marketplaces like us, I would say we are not that far from this day where a CPO can say, okay, on this, not I don't care, but it's done thanks to technology and key one or two vendors that I trust and I have long-term relationship. And then I would say Tailspin will be maybe considered a strategic supplier for one or two because it's significant amount of money. We are talking about from 5 to 20%, right, on the spend of the company. So it could be significant, right? We can talk about a few hundred of millions. So I would say I trust and I'm confident that in few years we'll maybe laugh about the current situation and say, okay, guys, what a journey, and we are glad that we are there yet. Not in, I would say, not managing anymore from a P2P perspective, the tailspin, but thinking long term and say, okay, I can have all services and products that I want, one-time purchase within few clicks, and my employees are okay. And I would say tailspin won't be a subject. So in few years, we won't have such a webinar like what is tailspin and so on. It will be managed. It will be something that it's done and completed, I would say.
It's not looked upon as being this separate area of procurement spend. It's just all managed through kind of the same process. Let's talk about ROI. I'm sorry that I'm not going to go back to Kelly yet for some of the questions because I know I want to talk about this topic and we've got about 10 minutes left. Vishal, what's the scope of savings potential that you typically see associated with effectively managing tail spend?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that can range, but what we've seen from customers, over the last several years is they can there's a potential to capture probably, anywhere from 5 to 15% in terms of savings when you're, actually putting in time and focus on tail spend. I would say it's about, 5 to 15%. But then in terms of ROI, then you have to think about like, are you creating like this, dedicated FTE to handle like procurement requests coming in that, that you've set up as this new buying, like they call it, like sometimes it's called a buying desk, right? Or did you contract with a BPO to outsource some of that management? Like, and you have to then think about those things and the cost of that and the return on that. But yeah, I would say you can sort of look at between 5 to 15% savings by focusing on, dedicated focus on tail spend.
So therefore, what's the elevator pitch? Jean-Baptiste said that there's still a number of organizations, obviously, who aren't at that point yet where they're looking at tail spend that can be managed in perhaps a more effective, efficient, and a more low-cost way. How are you helping procurement leaders sell the ROI of investing in their tail spend programs to, the CFO, the COO, whoever that business case needs to be made to?
Yeah, for us, I mean, we kind of we sell this as part of our broader offering, right? Like we are able to address the strategic spend items, but we're also able to address the tail spend. And there's also, and we haven't talked about this part, but there's also, parts of the accounts payable invoicing process that are related to tail spend, right? So you have to then think about also the time and effort on processing tail spend invoices, which tend to be the most time consuming and tend to increase that per invoice processing cost. You have to think about those as well. So when we're offering or we're selling our, address tail spend, it's kind of looking at the whole thing. So eliminate tail spend, understand tail spend, eliminate it from happening in the first place, but then, control it, offer users a way to manage the right channels, and then you can get your ROI. But for an elevator pitch, I feel like it's sort of a combination of, savings, but also in some ways risk. And in other ways also, to the point Jean-Baptiste mentioned is, until you understand what's going on in the tail spend, you don't know what you don't know, right? Like you don't know if you're not focusing on some innovative startup that you should be focused on,
right?
Or you don't know that you're wasting your money on some supplier that's in a high-risk country that is going to cause you problems later on in the road. When there's when you have to pay that supplier, maybe it's something that regulation-wise you shouldn't be doing. So I would say it's sort of those three: it's savings, risk, and probably new value. It's sort of the combination there.
From an internal procurement perspective as well, I think there's a huge ROI in. We talked all about the user experience and making it an easier user experience for folks to buy those things that we're considering tail spend at the moment, because that's where a lot of the bad reputation and perception of procurement comes in, is when we make it difficult for people to buy the things that should be the easiest things to buy. If you make it easier to buy those things, even if there's not a financial ROI associated with it because of whatever the purchase cost is, you're still changing the perception of procurement, and it's allowing procurement to focus on more strategic value-added activities, because you're not just seen as the person who gets in the way when they're trying to buy, the sandwiches for the meeting tomorrow. You're actually, there's no connotation with procurement from that, because that process is really easy. Jean-Baptiste, from your perspective, I know we've got 5 or 6 minutes left, and there's a couple of questions that I have. How do you, I'm sure you have folks who come and say, well, I can buy through Amazon Business, but actually I can go and buy from Amazon B2C, and maybe there's a difference in the piece price, in the cost of that. Like, what's the ROI for why specifically Amazon Business, when you probably have folks who just want to go and use their own buying channel?
It's a great question. And the main answer is efficiency of the P2P process. If you take your P card, obviously you can spend on Amazon or any online or even brick and mortar retailer, right? The only issue is that then you will generate a new invoice, maybe worth €25, right? Yeah. So basically that will cost the same price in terms of, let's say, getting processed by the account payable team. Then you will have to register a new vendor, and so on and so on. So I would say what we are pitching and explaining to the CFO and the CPO of the companies is like, you have one channel very well connected and integrated with your e-procurement system and also your e-invoicing systems, and say, let's say the cost of processing from PR, so purchase request, to payment will be reduced to the very low amount of money. And so you can tell again your employees to say, okay, you can buy on any B2C website, but it will cost you a lot, and it will be also a burden. Speaking, we are working in Europe, and in Europe there's a lot of VAT specific laws and processes. How to process an invoice is not that very, I would say, easy, and it requires a lot of verification and so on. So and not even speaking on the know your suppliers and the due diligence that we have to do each time we register any supplier. So I would say the pitch of Amazon Business is your employees will be happy to still buy on Amazon, right? It will be the very same super cool, convenient experience, same delivery and so on. But on the sourcing side, you will be also delighted of the, I would say, Amazon Business experience, because the P2B process will be seamless. it will cost much more. So you will save few FTEs into the account payable team, maybe also in the sourcing team. And so it will be same for you, plus you get the data and it costs, I would say, less. And not even speaking on managing the delivery fees, thanks to programs like Business Prime. And also having, let's say, one channel, and so you can at least try to understand what maybe your tail spend and decide, okay, I'm spending too much, I don't know, on iPads and I was not aware of. So let's get it out of any marketplace and let's ask a buyer to manage that.
We have a couple of minutes. I'm not sure if Kelly, you're still looking at the questions we're receiving. I want to give you the opportunity to ask one more quick fire question from the audience if you have one in mind.
Yes, I do. So question from Tina, which categories is procurement currently underutilizing effective approaches to tail spend? So we've kind of thought about it from high volume, low value, right? The transactions themselves. But when we think about it within the category context, are there categories of spend where procurement should be more on the lookout for tail spend and maybe taking an approach to resolving those transactions that very well fits the needs of the category? Vishal, perhaps I'll start with you.
I would assume it's kind of similar to some of the categories you mentioned, Jean-Baptiste, in so MRO, office supplies, janitorial supplies. A lot of it, I think, also it's what does the local, sort of office or business unit need in their particular location, and who are the suppliers around them that can provide that. It's kind of categories that would fall into that. So, we talked about like food, I think is probably one pretty common one. Yeah, I mean, those are the ones I would see. Jean-Baptiste, probably you have some more insights into this. I know you guys do some analysis, right, on categories?
Yeah. If we take a step back, I think you should also think and start with what are the categories that makes the most of noise, I would say, on a daily basis, and maybe those are good candidates to start with. Because there's noise, I would say, maybe it means that process is not clear, maybe the services provided to those employees are not clear from a sourcing point of view, maybe the quality is poor, or I don't know, they have, let's say, challenges with the quality of products and so on and so on. So I would start first with what the employees are complaining the most with. And so maybe those are the good candidates. And maybe, not maybe, but this is why, for example, I give you the example of the meals, right? People were complaining a lot, and it was not, let's say, a topic for any sourcing team, right? Where we were spending few hundred of thousands of euros, right? But from a company that spent 6 billion, I guess it's not that much. And so it was not a priority, but because it was creating a lot of noise. And then I go back to the how to pitch to any CPO, CEO, CFO. The tail spend is like you get rid of any churn that you get on a daily basis. I complain about this, and this. So I don't have, let's say, a precise answer on which categories, but I would say, because it depends on every company, I would start first how many emails you are receiving on any category, and then the top one should be a good candidate to start with.
I think that's a great answer, actually, because that goes to that perception of procurement, a question that we talked about as well before, and how do you stop those corridor conversations with folks complaining about their experience, their user experience, customer experience, as we're all moving towards that focus. Is very important. So I have to call time. It's been a really interesting conversation. I'm sorry to everybody who asked questions that we didn't get a chance to answer. We are still compiling all those behind the scenes, and we'll share those with the teams at iValue and our Amazon business. So thank you everybody for joining us today. And Jean-Baptiste, Vishal, and Kelly, thanks for being a part of today's AOP Live. I want to thank you for listening into today's episode of The Art of Procurement. To go deeper, including access to transcripts and actionable outtakes from the podcast, join the free level of our AOP Mastermind community. To learn more, go to artofprocurement.com/mastermind. And to find our entire back catalogue of almost 400 episodes, go to artofprocurement.com/podcast.